Some people bother about many things so much that they believe those things are obstacles to them getting something they desire. In Jesse's case, he worries so much about the lack of inspiration in his job and adulthood generally, until he meets a beautiful sophomore that is going to inspire him. In the opening scene of Liberal Arts, we see a bored Jesse having a pretend interview with himself. From his talks, he appeared uninspired with his job and life in general. In the next scene, Jesse carries his bag of dirty clothes for dry cleaning and reads on his way to dry clean them. When he arrives at the dry cleaner's shop, he drops the clothes on a table and goes forward to pay. On turning back after payment, his clothes are gone. Jesse rushes out immediately, only to see a man with his bag of clothes, and he chases him, but unfortunately can't catch up and hence misses him. Jesse has no other choice than to get new clothes before reaching home. At his house, while packing her stuff to move out, his ex notices the new shirt he's putting on. Jesse asks her if she likes the shirt, but she's not interested in giving compliments, because it's no longer her responsibility to make him feel good about himself. She drops a book in her box and walks out. Later on, he goes to get several books and buries himself in them. Even the lady selling books can't help but notice how engrossed in the book he is. It seems the only thing working for Jesse and keeping him going currently are the books. Before he leaves, she compliments his shirt and smiles. It seems she fancies guys that read. Well, what more can one expect from a bookseller? In the next scene, a phone call from Professor Peter Hoberg, his favorite college professor, wakes Jesse up. Professor Peter was once Jesse's lecturer and is retiring from his work in Ohio, and the school is organizing a retirement party for him. Since he was asked to invite some of his former students, he invites Jesse. Even though the date is not perfectly convenient for Jesse, he agrees to honor the invitation and be in attendance. Jesse travels back to Ohio from New York, and it's so good to be back home in the same college he attended. After some sightseeing, he goes to Peter's house and meets Susan and David, Peter's friends, who welcome him warmly. Before Peter comes to meet Jesse, he's already in a conversation with Susan and David. Susan talks about her daughter Zibby, a sophomore, and how she loves it there in Ohio. They are in Ohio to see their daughter's show. After their discussion about Zibby, Jesse goes on to ask how they know Peter. It happens that Peter was Susan's camp counselor. Peter meets them, while Susan is still talking about him. Peter and Jesse are both excited to see each other after a long while, and they hug. Peter has a reservation, so they all head out to eat. While in the car, Jesse and Peter chat. Peter has worked for 37 years. On their way, they see a female professor coming out of a store, and Jesse immediately recognizes her as Professor Fairfield. He shouts in excitement at how gorgeous she looks. Jesse lets Peter know how he always enjoyed Fairfield's British Romantic Literature class, and that she was the best lecturer he had. Peter, thinking he was Jesse's favorite lecturer while he was at college, gives him a disapproving look. Immediately, Jesse corrects himself and says she was his second best lecturer. Peter, understanding what just happened, just laughs. When Jesse and Peter arrive, Susan comes down with her daughter Zibby. She introduces her to Jesse before they all go to the restaurant. While they eat at the restaurant, they remind themselves of old times, and Jesse mimics how Peter talked to them in class about how he was fed up with America and decided to move to France. Peter doesn't seem to agree that the way Jesse explained things was how it happened then. Although Susan, David, and Zibby all laugh at Peter. Meanwhile, Peter refrains from telling them what Jesse was like in college, because he thinks it would hit him hard. However, Zibby seemed interested in knowing what Jesse was like. Jesse claims he was very handsome, but Peter jokingly doesn't agree to remembering that part of Jesse. He can only remember him being stubborn with his parents during graduation weekend, because he didn't want to leave. Jesse agrees that he acted like his parents were the reason college was ending. This makes David advise Zibby not to do that to him and her mother. Jesse now directs his conversation to Zibby and asks about her being in the improv group, like he heard from her parents. Zibby lets him know that she loves the fact that in improv, you can never say no. Jesse is confused about the rule of improv, so Zibby uses her mom as an illustration to make them understand what she means by never having to say no. Susan doesn't seem to understand what Zibby is doing. She looks at her, confused, when she asks her to hand over the lemonade. Zibby, seeing that her mom isn't playing along, abandons her and tells Jesse to hand her his lemonade, which he does, and at that point, they understand. The rule is to always do as you are told. On their way back, the elderly people walk ahead while Zibby and Jesse walk behind. Zibby and Jesse get into a conversation about what he studied at college. Jesse majored in English and then took history as a minor, just to make sure he was fully unemployable. Zibby wants to go into drama, even though her dad is not yet fully settled with the whole idea. While still discussing with Jesse how interesting improv can be, Susan's dad informs her that it's time for them to go. So she wraps up her conversation with Jesse and goes to the car. Later that night, they're at the retirement party, and Peter is giving his speech. Peter thanks Jesse for coming to the party, but Jesse doesn't take his appreciation seriously. But Peter lets him know that he means every word of what he said about being happy he was able to make it. When Peter leaves, Jesse goes outside and walks towards a tree. While he's looking at the tree, someone talks to him from behind, and he turns to see who it is. It's a young man, sitting on one of the chairs in the college lawns. The young man tells Jesse that he looks like Ethan, but Jesse lets him know he's not the person. The young man, just like Jesse, is not a student of the school, but is visiting someone. They introduce themselves, and the young man's name is Nat. Nat hears music from far away and suggests to Jesse that they try to find out where the music is coming from. But immediately Jesse refuses. Nat tells him people who say no never receive good fortune, and at this point, Jesse is left with no choice. They finally arrive at the place where the music is coming from, and it's a party. Nat offers to get a beer for Jesse, but he doesn't feel comfortable there because he's not a party person, and he wants to leave. Nat implores Jesse to stay back. When Jesse turns, he sees Zibby. Soon, Zibby walks up to him. She's surprised at how Jesse ended up at the party. But before Jesse can say anything, Nat tells him that he made a friend that brought him. Zibby introduces her friend Vanessa to Jesse, telling her that he's an alumnus. Jesse lets them know he graduated from school in the 90s, around when she and Zibby were born. Even though Jesse feels he's old, Zibby thinks he still looks good. At this point, she notices that he's overdressed for the party, so she walks towards him, removes his tie, and hangs it on his neck. Jesse just stands there staring and not uttering a word. Zibby agrees with Nat that Jesse is likable and offers to get them some drinks. Jesse immediately interrupts that he'd like to take his leave, but Zibby thinks he should stay. Nat seems to have noticed the way Jesse looks at Zibby and decides to help him plan something. At that point, he asks Zibby if she likes coffee, and since she does, he arranges a coffee meeting for the both of them. Zibby likes the idea and asks Jesse if he's comfortable with it. Jesse can't miss this opportunity, so he agrees and they set a time that's convenient for Zibby. While they're wrapping up their conversation, a guy walks up to Zibby and she goes to talk with him. Nat assured Jesse not to be worried about the guy that took Zibby, because he noticed that Zibby only has eyes for him. Jesse says his goodnight to Nat and leaves the party. Jesse goes to the coffee shop the next morning, and he sees a boy sleeping while reading a book. As a lover of books, Jesse picks up the book to look at it. The boy wakes up and wants to know why Jesse has his book, but Jesse feels it's the best book of all time. Later, after talking rudely, the boy leaves. Just a few seconds after Jesse sits down, Zibby arrives. Jesse asks to order a coffee for her, but she prefers to drink from his. Noticing the way she doesn't seem settled, Jesse wants what the problem is, but she doesn't give a straight answer. Zibby notices she smells like beer, and Jesse confirms it, so she leaves immediately. Jesse wonders what the problem could be, but he just goes ahead with reading his book. The boy whose book he collected earlier while he was sleeping notices Jesse and stops on his way out. He apologizes to Jesse for being rude earlier, even though it turns out they love the same writer. Jesse accepts the apology, letting the boy know that during his senior year, his grades fell, and that book was the only thing he wanted to read. It turns out that the boy has read the book twice, and this marvels Jesse, because the book has more than 1,000 pages. Jesse starts to feel like the boy may be lonely for him to be reading the book for the second time. While Jesse is still talking with the boy, Zibby comes out, and she recognizes the boy from her symbolic logic class. They don't know each other's names, so she introduces herself, and the boy informs her his name is Dean. Later, Zibby informs Jesse that Dean, although he's supposed to be one of the smartest people ever, had a manic episode last year, and she is even surprised he's back to school. When Jesse asks Zibby if she's okay, she tells him that she puked. Zibby starts to feel awkward and feels she just said something irritating, so she asks for them to take a walk. While they take a walk, Zibby informs Jesse that her parents like him, and it turns out Jesse likes them too. He believes she is lucky to have parents like hers, that are still together. Zibby likes her parents most when they're not being parental, and since that's only 1% of the time, it means she doesn't like them best most of the time. Zibby tells Jesse of the trick she employs to make her parents annoy her less. The trick is that she treats her parents like they're always drunk, so whenever they say something annoying to her, she just tells herself that they're drunk, so she can't get mad at them. And she shouldn't take advice from drunk people seriously. Zibby and Jesse are happy that they ran into each other last night, as this has allowed them to spend the day with each other. Jesse wants to know who the guy that took her away to talk at the party was. His name is Eric, and there's nothing between them. The fact that everything romance is casual is one thing that Zibby hates about that place, and it was also like that for Jesse back then. One thing Jesse liked about the place was that anything felt like it was possible, because once one gets out of school, anything could happen. With all Jesse says, Zibby thinks he's romanticizing youth just a little too much, because she thinks it's just as hard to be old as it is to be young. Zibby immediately adds that she's not making him feel old, because he's not, but Jesse gets her point. He explains that the argument of both old and young being equal is partly true and partly wrong. Because as for him, he feels different at the college now from when he was a student at the college himself. Zibby interprets everything Jesse says like she should prepare herself for bad experiences. However, Jesse assures her that she doesn't need to, because a liberal arts education will solve all her problems. At this point, Zibby is happy. She even requests a hug. Back at Peter's house, Jesse is packing his bag ready to leave, and Peter gives him some of his shirts that he won't need anymore. When Jesse makes jokes about one of the shirts, Peter takes that particular one back. Peter receives a call, and it turns out to be Zibby. She needs to see Jesse, and he agrees to meet her at the bookstore before he finally leaves. When Jesse arrives at the bookstore, Zibby is already there waiting. She hands him a music disc from her class that she made for him. Jesse is happy and grateful for the gift because he also likes classical music, but he regrets not bringing a gift for her. Zibby suggests that Jesse could write her a letter when he gets back, as a gift to her. Not an electronic letter, but a handwritten letter on paper, properly sealed. She wants it the old-fashioned way. Jesse agrees to her idea and collects her address. Her number is inside the disc case. They shake hands, and Zibby leaves the bookstore. Jesse is still at the bookstore when Professor Fairfield comes in. Since she passed him without recognizing her, he calls out to her, introducing himself as Jesse Fisher, who once took her romantic literature class. Surprisingly, Fairfield is very cold and doesn't even give a pleasing reply. She walks away when she notices Jesse doesn't have anything else to say. If Jesse had known he'd get that kind of reply, he would have let her pass without introducing himself. Jesse leaves the bookstore, and as he's driving to the college premises, he sees Dean, the boy from the coffee shop. Dean is smoking, and the way Jesse reacts tells Dean that he doesn't approve. Dean is headed to his dorm, so Jesse offers to drive him there. While together in the car, Dean questions Jesse about his stay while he was in college. Amid their discussion, Dean confesses that he doesn't like it at the school, making Jesse want to know why. Dean shares his experience last year on how he lost his mind and had to go to the hospital, where he was given that make him function. Since Dean doesn't enjoy being at the college, Jesse wants to know why he came back. It turns out that his mom, who single-handedly raised him, is proud he's at the school. He is in college just because of her. When Dean leaves the car, Jesse then puts the CD that Zibby gave him into the car CD player and drives off. After Jesse settles down back in New York, he writes to Zibby. In the letter, he thanks her for giving him the music. Apart from liking the music, he feels the music has mediated a truce between him and New York. He goes on to explain to her everything the music has opened his eyes to. This happens to be the beginning of their pen relationship. Zibby writes back to Jesse. She's happy he's loving the music she gave to him, and she gives her view on some of them too. After this first letter, they keep on exchanging letters, and in Zibby's last letter, she lets Jesse know that she'll be happy if he comes to visit her again, because she misses him. Also, she prefers a gentleman like him, and not young boys at school. After reading this letter, Jesse is stunned. It appears things have unfolded to be more than friendship for her. When Jesse goes home, he sits down and calculates the age difference between him and Zibby. It turns out to be a whole 16 years. As a 35-year-old man, he is wondering if it is the best decision to be with someone as young as Zibby. After much thought, he finally decides to take up the offer and visits Ohio. When Zibby sees Jesse at the college, she's very excited and hugs him. Meanwhile, Peter is in Bob's office, trying to explain that he may have spoken too soon about retiring. But unfortunately, someone else has already been hired to take his place. Peter, at this point, gets angry and reminds Bob of how he brought him into the school and made him become the department chairman. Seeing that shouting at Bob won't change anything, Peter decides to calm down and talk politely, but it still doesn't end up making Bob change his mind. In the next scene, Zibby brings Jesse to her room, and he meets her roommate Vanessa. Vanessa immediately reads the room and leaves. Not knowing how Peter will take the situation, Jesse prefers not to inform him of his presence, and tells Zibby not to mention it to him either. Jesse lets her know how weird he feels being at her place, because he's years older than her. Jesse overthinking the age issue is making him act awkward and nervous, but Zibby feels he should not overthink things. She claims to want to take things slowly, but she still feels like kissing him on his forehead. Then she goes on to kiss his chin, his cheeks, then his lips. Suddenly, Vanessa comes back into the room without knocking. Seeing them in that position, she immediately grabs what she came for and heads back out. But everything has already become awkward. They are both hungry, and they opt for a closer place suggested by Zibby, which is the students' cafeteria. At the cafeteria, Jesse loses Zibby, so he sees Dean and sits with him to have lunch. Dean is working on a novel, although he's not deriving much joy from it, but he continues anyway. Dean wonders why Jesse loved it at the school when he was there as a student. Because, for him, he just wishes everything concerning college will be over soon. But Jesse lets him know that college is the only time one gets to read books and have great conversations, because the outside world isn't friendly with that. He seems to be speaking from experience. While they're still talking, Zibby sees Jesse and calls him. Before Jesse leaves, he writes out his number for Dean, so he can reach out to him when he wants to. Back in Zibby's room, while Jesse is waiting for her, he picks up a book. He's surprised that she has that particular book, and she even claims to have read all of it. He notices that Zibby doesn't seem interested in that particular conversation when he shares a different view of the book. Soon, their conversation is rising to an argument. Noticing this, Zibby thinks they should just stop the conversation. She does not think Jesse should tell her the book isn't nice because he hasn't read it, so he offers to read it at once so that they can discuss it later. He immediately leaves her room and reads the book on his way to the bookstore. While reading the book at the bookstore, Professor Fairfield sees him and is taken aback. Without her saying anything, Jesse notices her face change and explains that he's reading it as a bet. Professor Fairfield just walks out. Eventually, Jesse is done with reading the book, so they meet up to talk about it. Zibby goes first, explaining she liked the book, and the fact that it was fun and stupid at the same time. When she's done with her review, Jesse gives his review, and it's that the book is the worst book ever written in English. Zibby doesn't support Jesse's view. To her, the book makes people happy. Jesse's view starts to piss Zibby off, and she tells him with slight anger that he thinks it's cool to hate things, but it's better he keeps quiet about things he hates, and talks more about things he loves. Zibby collects the book and tries to make him calm his anger when Peter walks in. Unlike what they expect, he doesn't act surprised to see Jesse. He just exchanges pleasantries with Zibby and walks past them. Jesse stands up immediately and goes after Peter. They meet at a coffee shop where they discuss a few things. On Jesse's way back, he meets Nat. Even though Nat may seem weird and always sarcastic, he uses the theory of a caterpillar cell and something he calls marginal cells to cheer Jesse up and tell him never to be afraid, no matter what. At this point, Jesse is confused by some of the things Nat says. Nate gives him some of his water so he can stay hydrated. After Jesse drinks the water, Nat stands up and does something weird, touching Jesse's head and beating his chest, like he's initiating him into a fraternity. Jesse seems scared and confused about what he may be doing. Jesse goes back to Zibby's room, and she notices that he is happy. Zibby pours her heart out to Jesse about how she feels about him, of course except for the book situation, because that was annoying. Zibby wants Jesse to stay at her place overnight, but Jesse reminds her that she has a roommate. He probably thinks he can avoid the whole sleeping over, but it's like everything has been prepared, and Vanessa is sleeping somewhere else that night. Left with no other choice, Jesse agrees to sleep over. He kind of feels uncomfortable with the next thing Zibby says. Even though she doesn't talk directly, it's like she wants him to be the first person she'll get intimate with. So, due to confusion and nervousness, Jesse goes to the bathroom to ease himself. When he comes back, Zibby starts regretting mentioning it to him. But Jesse isn't upset. Instead, he's glad she told him. He gives her reasons why he doesn't want to have sex with her. When he mentions his age, it doesn't bother her, because age is nothing to obsess over. She starts to think that maybe Jesse didn't come back here to see her, but he assures her he did. As the adult that he is, he tries to explain to her how complicated sex may be. But she does not understand, because that is not what a 19-year-old wants to hear. She hasn't met anyone she liked enough to have gotten intimate with, till she met Jesse. At this point, there are already tears in her eyes. Jesse tells her plainly that he can't do what she's asking him to do. Even though he likes her, he doesn't want to sleep with her, because he believes that's not the right thing to do, especially since he cares about her. Zibby sees this as the saddest thing ever, and tells Jesse to go, because she is already upset. He leaves without any argument. From there, Jesse goes to a bar, and while he's sitting alone, Professor Fairfield sees him. At that point, she remembers him a little bit. Fairfield invites Jesse to have fries with her, and they chat while they eat. Jesse is curious to know what made Fairfield love romantic literature, and goes on, talking about how much he loved her class. At one point, he stops talking when he notices the reaction on Fairfield's face. That probably says he has talked too much, or she's not interested in whatever he's saying. Then, Fairfield invites Jesse to ride somewhere with her. After the encounter with Jesse, Zibby is upset and she goes to a party. And after drinking some cups of beer, she suddenly starts to kiss Eric. Back at the place Fairfield invited Jesse, they have gotten intimate. Once done, she immediately tells him to leave, and starts to smoke a cigarette. Jesse is shocked at the way she dismisses him, but it's obvious that what she wanted for the night, she has already gotten. But Jesse is really surprised that Professor Fairfield he knew in college would be doing such a thing now. However, Fairfield lets him know that the fact that they had sex with each other doesn't mean they're now friends, and then she says some other mean things to him. Jesse notices that Fairfield's attitude may not be normal, and she's probably sad. So he wonders why she can't get joy from things around her. Fairfield lets him know that she once found joy in teaching, but not anymore. It seems adulthood comes with losing passion and inspiration at some point after all. Even though Jesse wants to know the reason, Fairfield isn't ready to give him every detail of her life. She advises Jesse to harden his soft heart just a little. Before Jesse leaves, he once again tells her how good her class was, and the things it did for him. Her romantic class is the reason for his soft heart. The next morning, Peter walks Jesse to the car. Peter is happy to see him one last time before he finally leaves the school. They talk a little more, before Jesse finally enters the car and leaves. Some months later, Jesse writes a letter to Zibby. He apologizes for hurting her and explains his reasons. Jesse goes over to the bookstore to pick up a book he has been reading for a while. He meets the bookstore seller, Anna, who complimented his shirt in the beginning. She even hands him the book before he tells her which one he's looking for. It appears she has already noticed him reading anytime he's at the store. Feeling comfortable with each other's company, they later start to discuss books. Anna loves books so much that it has made her love trees too, because they produce books. She has taken a step to start reading less, because she felt like reading about life was taking her away from living life. Jesse suggests they get away from the books and take a walk, and Anna agrees to it. When Jesse gets back home, he receives a call from Dean. The reason Dean calls Jesse is because he just took a bunch of pills, and he's really scared. Jesse just tells him to stay right where he is, so he can get help for him. Dean is taken to the hospital, and Jesse goes to see him. Dean is grateful to Jesse for picking up the phone and coming through for him. Jesse advises him to stop reading the book, because someone in the book ended his life, and he wouldn't want Dean to do that. Since Dean loves to read books, he asks Jesse for an alternative. Surprisingly, Jesse suggests the vampire books that he argued over with Zibby. Once more, Dean becomes emotional, and he's grateful to Jesse for flying from New York to see him when they barely know each other. From the hospital, Jesse goes on to visit Zibby. Without Jesse apologizing again, Zibby admits she finally understands what he meant back then. Zibby starts to feel emotional while she talks about how immature she can be at times, and tears drop from her eyes. In the middle of the conversation, Vanessa, Zibby's roommate, walks in and goes right back out when she sees Jesse in the room. She must have been thinking, oh, not again. Jesse leaves Zibby and decides to get back to being an adult, to avoid any romantic situations with a teenager. He ends up being with Anna, to appease her for their previous misunderstanding. Jesse sends Zibby some vampire books to read, since he criticized the one she liked. Meanwhile, the relationship between Anna and Jesse gets stronger. He is no longer the uninspired man he was with his ex. She even thinks his gray hair is a sign of wisdom. But because Jesse is bothered about getting old, he thinks it's a sign of old age. Anna assures Jesse that he'll be a great old guy. This makes Jesse think Anna will also be a sexy old lady. The movie ends with Anna in Jesse's arms. Eventually, it takes a roller coaster ride with a teenager for Jesse to finally find meaning in his life.